Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Solstice edition of the Astro Imaging channel. For all of us imagers out there, it's the sad day because the nights are so short, but the days are warm, at least if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. So there's that. Tonight, we have Nico Carver, who you may know from Nebula photos on YouTube, who's going to talk to us about free software and doing image processing with that. So, but before we turn it over to Nico, next week on the 28th, we are going to be here with you, and Charlie Bracken is going to be talking to us. You may know him from books like the Astro Imaging Primer. And so Charlie is always interesting, and I'm sure Nico is going to be interesting for us tonight. So Nico, take it away.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you for having me. 1 second while I get my PowerPoint up here. So this talk, I'm going to start with an overview of the current state of free processing software, and specifically for deep sky imagers. I know there's a lot of free software also for planetary imagers, but it's not really my forte. So I'll be specific about sort of deep sky kind of imaging. And then after an overview of sort of what's out there right now, I'm going to go into a bit more specifics with Siril, S-I-R-I-L, and Affinity. And the reason for those two is just because they're the two that I'm most familiar with. Not saying they're the best or anything, but just they're the ones that I tend to use the most. And if I get through all of these slides quickly enough, I'll maybe do a short live demo of a few things I find interesting in the Siril and Affinity. So to start, I'll just give a little bit about myself. I've been an amateur astrophotographer for over 10 years. I started in around 2014. And for the past 3.5 years, it's been my full-time job. Before this, I was an astronomy librarian at the Harvard Observatory. And then 3.5 years ago, I moved up here to New Hampshire, and so I could be under dark skies. And now I just do this all the time. And for anyone that's curious as to what it means to be a full-time astrophotographer, I sort of split my time between 3 main activities. I do in-person workshops and events, and so I'm on the road doing these maybe a month out of the year. The last one was in last May, or this past month. I was down in San Pedro de Atacama in Chile with a small group, and that was very nice. It was the first time I've been in the Southern Hemisphere seeing those skies, so I'd like to do that one every year. It was so cool to see the Large Magellanic Cloud. I'd encourage anyone to, if you haven't seen the Southern Hemisphere skies, to get down there and see them in person. And then I also offer an online community, and so that takes up a lot of my time because it's a paid community, so I want to offer some benefit back to the people paying for it. So I do one-on-one messaging support and Zooms and different things for people who are in the Patreon. And then the last third of my time, I'm doing public videos, you know, the reviews and tutorials and things on YouTube. And that's also how I think people, you know, become aware of my Patreon and the other things that I do. So that's sort of just a summation of how I spend my time as a full-time astrophotographer. What little time I have left, I spend on personal projects. So unfortunately, being a full-time astrophotographer doesn't mean, for me at least, just spending all my time working on personal astrophotography projects. That would maybe when I retire from this, I'll just do that. But right now, I'm busy doing sort of education stuff for the most part. And in terms of education, I focus on beginner astrophotographers, so people just getting started in the hobby. I find that I'm good at supporting people who have a lot of questions as they're just getting into the hobby. And a beginner question that I get a lot is, if I'm just starting out in deep sky imaging, should I start with free software or paid software? And I think part of the thinking with this question is that they don't want to waste time, right? They don't want to maybe spend time on free software if they think they're going to go right to paid software. And so I don't usually have like a one size fits all answers for this. If someone really seems like they just want to dive into PixInsight and all that stuff, I say go for it. But of course, if someone's really unsure, I'm going to look at their budget. And the thing that a lot of beginners is budget conscious. So maybe spending $500 if you're getting like PixInsight and the RC Astro tools right off the bat isn't the right call for some beginner imagers. If you think about what people spend at the beginning, they may just use camera gear they already have, like a DSLR and lens, or they may be getting a smart telescope for under $500. And so in those cases, I think free software can make a lot of sense. But then something I tell people, even if you're not personally using much free software, you're likely still already benefiting, because by having this sort of competitive space where there's a lot of free software being made, I think it pushes all the software developers to look at that and think about what kind of features and UIs people are coming out with. Let me now get into sort of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about free software. So I went through and tried to cull down my list of everything that I have ever installed, because there's a lot out there, of course. And what I was really looking for in this list was things that were still under active development in 2026. Because as you can imagine, a lot of free software efforts, they start up with a lot of enthusiasm, and then if it doesn't really take off, those developers may sort of abandon the project. And even if it's really good software, if it's abandoned, I don't think it's something I would normally recommend, because you really want developers that are able to listen to the community and put in bug fixes and make new features and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I mean by active development, is that there's at least one person out there who can program and make new versions of the software. So I broke this down into 4 major categories. So we're going to start over here on the left-hand column with software that mostly does pre-processing. And so what that means in terms of deep sky imaging is things like calibration and registration and stacking, but also some of these programs do analysis of your data. So usually you do that analysis when your data is still raw data, like no processing done on it. And you look at things like, the number of stars or the tilt or things like that. So some of these programs can do some analysis of your data as well. So the first one that probably a lot of people have heard of, and it's the first program that a lot of deep sky imagers use to stack their data, is called DeepSkyStacker. It's been around a long time. When I was getting started in 2014, it was already available. And it's a good starting place. There's nothing wrong with it. And it's still being actively developed. It's now has an actual GitHub page and everything. It's completely open source, and they're also making it cross-platform, which is really cool. So when I was getting started, it was Windows only. Another stacking program, but a lot of people don't use it for stacking, but that it is in the name, is ASTAP. And this can also be used for plate solving and a bunch of other things, tilt analysis and different little mini tools built into it. But it's also a very actually competent free stacking program. Okay, another free one, not open source, but ZWO offers something called ASI Studio that has a bunch of different little mini programs within it. And it has both a planetary stacker and a DeepSkyStacker in there. And the stackers are not ZWO specific. You can bring any FITS data into those and stack it. Okay, and then I wasn't sure if to put this in stacking or task specific, because it's a pretty weird stacking program in that it only does star trails, but it's one of probably the best program I know of for doing star trails. So when you're doing star trails, a lot of people don't just do one long picture. They break it up into many shorter exposures, and that helps you retain the color of the stars. And what this can do is stack all of those star trails photos together. And you might be thinking, why not just do that in something like Photoshop? But with StarStax, it has some specific algorithms. Like for instance, when you're holding or when you start an intervalometer on your camera and there's a little gap when the camera writes the picture to the buffer, that little gap in time will actually show up as in little gaps in your star trails. And so StarStax has a gap filling algorithm. So basically it makes the star trails solid again by just intelligently filling in all those little gaps. And then this is a pretty famous one, AutoStakkert. It's mostly used by lunar and planetary imagers, but I'm including it here because it's also can be used for lucky imaging of deep sky. And it's actually, I think, one of the better programs for doing lucky imaging deep sky stacking when you have a lot of data. Okay, then this next list, this could go on and on and on because there's so many plugins that are free. I'm not including all of the PixInsight plugins here that are free because PixInsight itself is a paid program. But of course, a lot of people have their favorite free paid plugins for PixInsight. Some of these are available for PixInsight, though, I should say. So this first one, StarNet and DeepSNR. This is a star removal program and a noise reduction program, both based on neural nets where they used actual astrophotography data to train the model. And these are very good. They're completely free. They are, for a long time, Makita didn't accept donations, but recently, if you go to his website, starnetastro.com, he now has a PayPal donation link set up. So very good sort of AI based programs that are helpful for a couple different tasks. Another good one is Grappert. This started as a gradient removal program. It can be used standalone or as a plugin. It also now has noise reduction and some other things built in. GHS, this is something that I started using a couple years ago, and it's a stretching plugin that it works in PixInsight and Siril, and people love it or hate it. I'm a lover of GHS. Some people don't like the hyperbolic stretches, but I find that I really enjoy using it. So you should, if you've never tried it, you should at least try it out sometime. I can't remember the website, but this is another free one you can get for Siril or PixInsight as a plugin. This is something pretty new, but I think it's really taking off. It's called Psychon. It's based out of, I think, Italy, somewhere in the European Union at least, because I think the web name is psychon.eu. And we'll talk about this more later. What I find, something I find pretty interesting about it is that they're the first sort of AI-based plugin company that's doing a very interesting freemium model with their models, which I think might take off. We'll see. And then Verilux, I believe this is also an Italian developer. This is a series of scripts that are, I think, Siril only, but they're free, donation supported, and they're really taking off in the Siril community. And the ones that I know about are mostly around stretching, so different ways of stretching your data. And he also has a very good curves script. Okay, and then the next column here is complete workflow. This is just a couple programs. SETI Astro Suite Pro, I won't talk about too much because you had Frank on just a couple months ago, and he, of course, does a much better job of talking about his software that he developed. But it's a really cool effort that started out as just him querying ChatGPT and making PixInsight scripts, and now it's its whole thing. It's a whole standalone program with all the stuff he's developed and built into it. That's also just free and donation supported. Siril, this is another effort that I'll be talking about a lot more tonight. That is pretty old actually, and but it's changed a lot over the years, and it's a free complete program. You could go from pre-processing, post-processing. It has everything built in, but then a big part of how it's gotten even bigger in the past couple of years is opening it up to third-party developers with scripts. Okay, and then the last category here are layer-based photo editors. We could also call these Photoshop clones. We have Affinity and we have the GNU image manipulation program. Both are pretty old Photoshop clones, and they're both very full-featured. The big difference between these two is that Affinity is owned by Canva now, which is a for-profit company, and GNU image manipulation program is, of course, a classic open source kind of program where anyone can start developing for that one. Okay, so now that's sort of the overview of a bunch of things. Some of these I'm not going to talk about again, but I just wanted to give you sort of like the lay of the land for all the free software that I'm currently using and testing often. Now I want to go through sort of paid software you might know, and then talk about its closest free corollary. So meaning like if you use Photoshop, the free paid corollary would be Affinity or GNU image manipulation program, right? Because they offer a lot of the same feature sets. They may be laid out similarly, that kind of thing. So the first one here is PixInsight, one of the most famous deep sky imaging programs today for amateur astrophotographers, but also, you know, SDSCI, who does like the James Webb images, uses PixInsight as well. So it is used in professional context too. It is one of the more expensive software in terms of the one-time cost. But I will say that, you know, you pay that once and then you own the program forever. So I first paid for PixInsight probably in 2015 and have never paid anymore. And the price of it has gone up over the years a little bit. So the closest free corollaries to PixInsight are Siril and SETI Astro Suite Pro. I would say that in terms of the way it's laid out, SETI Astro Suite Pro is a little closer to PixInsight in that it's multiple windows. You can open up multiple images at the same time and has corollaries with image containers and things like that are unique to PixInsight. Siril doesn't have any of that. It's you're working on one image at a time kind of program. But the way that Siril might be a little bit more familiar or similar to PixInsight is that it's now taking off with third-party developers. So a lot of the scripts like GHS, which I mentioned earlier, is available for both PixInsight and for Siril. Well, SETI Astro Suite Pro, a lot of times Frank is writing his own versions of things from scratch. Okay, and then I'm going to just quickly go through Russ Kroman's suite, talking about sort of what's available in terms of these paid plugins. So Blur Exterminator is a neural net-based deconvolution thing where it breaks up your images into tiles and applies a custom deconvolution into different parts of the image using AI. So Cosmic Clarity is a free alternative that's written by Frank again, who does the SETI Astro Suite Pro. That's available in PixInsight, Siril, or SAS Pro. A newer one that just came out, I think, a few weeks ago is SYON Parallax. And this one is that one that I mentioned has an interesting model in that it's for paying for it, in that it has a free version, which uses basically a downgraded model, but it's still good enough for a lot of people. And then it has a paid version, which you can either pay for just the particular software you use. Like if you use Siril, you could just pay like a one-time cost of whatever it is, 60 euro. Or if you want just every version under the sun that will work in any software you might own, you can pay an even bigger price for all those pro models of it. Okay. Another one here is Star Exterminator. This removes the stars in your images. And oops, it is available as a plugin for PixInsight, Photoshop, and Affinity for about $60. The free alternatives would be StarNet, which actually came slightly before Star Exterminator, but it's based on the same principle of training based on actual astrophotography data, training a neural network. And then a much newer one is this SYON Starless, which is available again with that freemium model. What I like about SYON Starless is that it's much easier to install if you're a Siril user than StarNet is. One thing that I always struggle with in teaching people is that StarNet can be a little bit more complicated to install, especially if you have a Mac, because there's a lot of security theater you have to go through to actually get it installed on a Mac. Okay, and then noise exterminator. This is, again, we're talking about neural net kind of programs trained on actual astrophotography data. The same developer who did StarNet, Makita, has DeepSNR. That's available standalone or as a plugin. And then Psychon Deep Prism is the Psychon version of a noise reduction algorithm based on actual astrophotography data. Now, I might get the question of like, how would you rank all of these different options? And I haven't done that in a sort of serious way, so I can't tell you, which one is better or worse. I will say that I've tried these things myself, and I often can barely tell a difference. But I'm maybe not as picky as some people, and maybe if I did it in a more rigorous way, then I would see some more clear differences. But when I'm just sort of going through and processing things, I use any combination of these and feel that they do a pretty good job. For a long time, I would say that the one of these that was the most standout was Blur Exterminator. Like nothing could sort of touch that. But I've been hearing that this new Psychon people are pretty happy with, Psychon Parallax. Okay, and then we have Photoshop, which is not necessary, of course, but a lot of people do like working in a layers-based program, maybe towards the end of your processing. It has gotten a little expensive. A lot of times they'll start you at a lower rate of like $9.99 a month on sale, and then after a year it bumps up to $23 a month now, just for Photoshop alone. You can also bundle the Adobe products. That's going to be, of course, more expensive when you think of the total price, but if you're thinking of all the different programs, when you bundle, you do save a lot of money if you're someone who uses a lot of Adobe products. This is one of the sort of issues I have where even if I wanted to fully move to Affinity and drop Photoshop, I'm still using some of the other Adobe products like InDesign and After Effects. So it's still, I would have to find alternatives for those as well. Okay, Affinity is an interesting one. I'll talk about its whole history, but I put free with an asterisk here because it's a freemium model since Canva took over. So you do have to register for a Canva account. And right now, the premium features are all AI-based features. So if you don't need those, you can just get away with the free version of Affinity. But who knows? They might change that in the future. They might decide, they'll start taking away features or something. We don't really know. But right now, at least, Affinity is free for all of the parts of it that we're used to using. Oh. And then the last one here is the GNU image manipulation program. That is an very old alternative to Photoshop. I will say that with GIMP 3.0 that came out pretty recently, they finally added adjustment layers and things that I've been wanting for a long time. So it's gotten better. I would still say that Affinity is closer to Photoshop if you're a longtime Photoshop user like me.
Nico?
Yeah.
Deonster is asking, is this a tier list? I think that means, is this ranked or anything? And can you explain the logic of how you're explaining this?
Sure. Yeah, no, this is not a tier list. This is just a, on the left-hand side for the past few slides, I've been showing a paid application, and then there's an arrow, and on the right-hand side, I'm showing a free corollary or a free version of that program. Not necessarily the exact same, but very close. So for instance, in this case, Noise Exterminator, a very similar free program that does the same thing would be DeepSNR or Psychon Deep Prism.
Thank you. I think that should answer the question. If it doesn't, the answer, just come on back. That's all the questions we've got so far.
Great. And I have done a video in the past where I looked at different stacking software and did come up with a way to rank them based on scores. I have had requests to do that again, so maybe I'll get into it again. I would say I wasn't taking the ranking very seriously, but I think some people did take my rankings more seriously than maybe I was. So I'm not sure. Maybe I'll do that again, but it can be fun just to, rank things, have an opinion. Recently, Charlie Bracken, who you're having on next week, ranked, thousands of deep sky objects, which I thought was pretty fun in his new book. So it can be fun to have a strong opinion and rank things that way. So now I've gone through now I'm done with this sort of the overview part of this of a bunch of different software, sort of talking about what different software does. And now I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive on just two pieces of software, Siril and Affinity. So I'll start here with Siril. Siril is a French program, mostly. I mean, it started in France, and the main developers are still French, although it is open source, and it does have a community of people writing for it across the world. So it's not only French, but the main focus, I think, has been French astronomers working on it. It's available at Siril.org. And I took this screenshot right here off the homepage, so it's very easy to see like how to download things. Like there's the three operating systems right there in the front, and if you just click on one of those green buttons, you click on it and it gives you a couple options, and then you can just immediately download the program and install it. It's available for Linux, Windows, and Mac, and it's under very active development, meaning every month or two, sometimes a few months, but many times a year, they give a new release. And then when there's a new release, you can just go back to the website and download a new version, but it will also within the program tell you there's a new release and give you the option to update. It does not automatically update. The latest release is 1.4.4, which was released just 5 days ago. Okay, and I wanted to just give a little history of Siril for people who are unfamiliar. It came out over 20 years ago now, in 2005, and it was initially advertised as a clone of another French astronomy software called IRIS, I-R-I-S. That was developed by the famous astrophotographer Christian Buell. And IRIS was a Windows-only program. So the goal of Siril was to make a Linux clone. So the name Siril comes from reversing the letters of IRIS and adding an L for Linux. The original developer of Siril worked on it for just those 2 years, or 2 or 3 years, 2005 through 2007, and then abandoned it. And so for the next 5 years, it was available, I guess, but an abandoned project. And then in 2012, because it was open source, another team of developers was able to come in and take over active development of it. And since 2012, it's the same team of French astronomers has been working on it. And in 2017, it expanded out from just Linux to Windows and Macintosh as well. And in 2018 is, I think, I traced back to when I found out about it. And I'll tell you how I found out about it. I was making tutorials for beginners showing how to, and again, I was sort of in this mindset of beginners want free software, which I think was true. And so the free software that I knew about for manipulating deep sky images were DeepSkyStacker for the stacking and the GNU image manipulation program for the post-processing. But DeepSkyStacker at that time was Windows only. And so I got a comment saying, well, isn't there any free deep sky stacking software for Mac? And I said, I don't know of any, but I'll check and see if there's anything. And that's how I found Siril, which again, just in the past year had become available for Mac. So I tried it out, and this is what the UI looked like. And I found it confusing enough that I did not want to cover it on my YouTube channel. I could make it work, but it wasn't, I didn't feel it was like user-friendly yet. But I kept following the project at that point. And in 2019, I saw that they had a new beta out for a new UI, a completely sort of new look, but not only a new look, sort of a whole new workflow and way of doing things that I thought made a lot more sense. And so in 2020, that new UI had its first stable release. And from 2020 on, with this new interface, I think the team behind Siril have just been really putting in a lot of work to make it a very viable program for deep sky imaging. So I've been very impressed since then of how far it's come along. And in 2023, their version 1.2 introduced things like generalized hyperbolic stretch and star recomposition. And while I don't necessarily use these tools every time in my workflow, the introduction of these tools into Siril did change how I approached processing. So it really shook up, how I was doing things, and I reconsidered everything and really changed a lot about how I was processing these very dim kinds of targets. I was already using a starless workflow, but I think the introduction of things like JHS and this modified arc sign stretch and these different kinds of stretches has really opened my eyes to what's possible. So I was very impressed by version 1.2, but probably an even bigger deal happened just last year, because in 2025 they opened up with version 1.4 to Python scripting. And there's a lot of developers, I guess, who are good at Python scripting. And this is it's been pretty amazing in the past year and a half, just how many scripts are being written for Siril now that you can write the scripts in Python. And so I think that a lot more people are sort of seeing that Siril it's not just Siril now, it's Siril plus all these third-party developers coming in and offering new kinds of tools that can be really cool. This one that I'm showing on the screen here is called Verilux Curves. It's by an Italian astrophotographer. And maybe I'll be able to show this in a demo, but it's a very nice curves tool, sort of reminiscent of some of the things that the PixInsight curves tool can do, like putting saturation on a curve, which is up until this one, I think was maybe unique to PixInsight. Okay, and then in terms of resources for learning Siril, it's never been a better time, because the lead developer of Siril, who happens to be, just by coincidence, also named the first print textbook, which I have right here. It's called Astrophotography, Mastering Image Processing with Siril version 1.4. And it's a really nice book. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but just flipping through it, you can see that he put in, it's full color, and he put in all of these really nice big screenshots as you're following along with things. So it's really well laid out, and the topics covered are really nice. Like a lot of the things that are covered are things that might be hard to find if you don't have the book, like making animations for your comet captures and things like that, or even scripting, because that's a popular thing with Siril, is writing your own scripts, and there's a chapter on that. In terms of video, I really recommend Deep Space Astro YouTube channel. This is a guy named Rich, who does a really nice job of covering Siril in depth. I've done maybe 10 tutorials, and he's done over 100, I think. So if you really want to learn the program in and out, definitely check out his channel, because he has both sort of the start to finish is what I sort of focus on, and he has those too. But then he also has the deep dives on each new tool that's coming out, and a lot of the third-party tools as well. Okay, the other program I want to do a little bit of a deep dive on here is Affinity. This one you can get at affinity.studio, and the current release is 3.2.2. It's available on Windows and Mac OS, so it's not available for Linux, but it is available for Windows and Mac. And as you can see, that's the page right on the download page. It says sign up to download. So one thing to keep in mind is you do have to make a Canva account to download this program, and sometimes it'll occasionally ask you to log in. So they're probably tracking you or something. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but I think that in the agreement it says something about like they're tracking your use of it a little bit. So that's a little bit different than some of these other free software where you download them and it's just, it's just the package, no account needed, nothing like that. So just keep that in mind. But it is a very full-featured program. There's a lot to it. So let me give you a little history of this one too. This one started with a company called Serif, and they had a program called Photo Plus that was Windows only. They started that program in 1999. I don't think it was particularly popular. In 2015, they released a very different version for Mac only at first. And basically, you can think of it as an alternative to Photoshop. It was called Affinity Photo. And within a year, they also had a Windows version. I think around 2016 or 17, I bought Affinity Photo when it was still on version 1. And I think I bought it just because I was interested, because I was still a Photoshop user. But it was already in this period starting to take off, because I think around this time is when Photoshop moved to a subscription model. So a lot of people weren't happy with that. Affinity Photo was an option to have something like Photoshop that was perpetual license. So basically you bought it once and then you could keep using it forever off that license. And then in 2019, something pretty unexpected happened. At least I didn't expect it, which is that Affinity Photo version 1.9 included something called Astrophotography Stack. So basically it was like DeepSkyStacker built right into Affinity Photo. Including full calibration. It can take flats, bias, darks, everything, even flat darks. It can do registration. It can do stacking. All of that stuff is built in. So your entire pre-processing workflow, you don't have to go to a different program. You could start that right in Affinity. It spits out the finished stacked image and then just keep working on it like you're working in Photoshop. And one of the developers for Affinity Photo is named James Ritson, who has a YouTube channel. And he also released, I think he was responsible for a lot of this, and he released astro-specific macros as well for Affinity Photo. So basically, similar to if you've ever used the action tool sets in Photoshop, like astronomy tools tool set, similar to that, in that they would go through a few different steps for you, like shrink stars macro or saturate nebula macro, that kind of thing, where they would somewhat intelligently do some steps in Photoshop to enhance your astrophotography. Then in 2025, Canva, which probably you've heard of, it's like an online design program, acquired Serif. And what they did with it is they combined Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Publisher into one program, now just called Affinity, and they put this freemium model on it. So currently, I think, as I've said, the only features that are paid features in Affinity are the AI features, while everything else is included for free. Excuse me. But then another thing that happens is basically, since Affinity Photo Designer and Publisher are now all in one program, the interface has gotten a little more confusing, a little bit more to work through, but it's not too bad. And luckily, all of the astrophotography features and macros and things from the earlier versions of Affinity still are included and are still working. So I was pretty happy about that, because if they weren't, then you would be on an older version of Affinity that probably eventually will stop working because they're no longer maintaining it. And James Ritson also still works for Affinity. I mean, now Canva, but I've confirmed that he's still part of the company. And speaking of, he has a YouTube channel where he does occasional astrophotography specific tutorials, but he also just does lots of tutorials on Affinity in general. And the last thing I wanted to say about Affinity is that it's similar enough to Photoshop that in many cases, I think you could just follow a Photoshop tutorial and everything will be same enough that you could probably get by. There might be a few things that are confusing, but a lot of times I found what Affinity actually does is if something is pretty confusing in Photoshop, they actually make it much easier. And so I'm about to do a live demo, and I'll show you an example of that in Affinity, which, an example of something that whenever I'm teaching Photoshop, it's a bit confusing to explain how something works. I think once you learn how it works in Affinity, it's like, oh, well, that's very intuitive, the way that they changed it. So I think a lot of times the reason that Affinity is different from Photoshop is when they want to make something actually clearer in how it's designed. All right. If there's any questions at this point, I'm happy to answer them. But then if not, I'll go on to a live demo.
Nico, we're going along fine here. We don't have any new questions, just the people cheerleading for one thing or another that you said, or for the program they use.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Nico, I did have one question. So I've been using Affinity Photo 2, and I haven't used Affinity, I think, since they got bought out. Are they different?
Yes.
And how?
So Affinity Photo 2 was the last version developed by Serif, which was a company until it was acquired by Canva last year. Then Canva made a bunch of decisions in terms of how to go forward with the Affinity product after they acquired it. And basically they've made it into this one thing. So now Affinity Photo is a part of just Affinity, and it's just one program. And it is free, so you can definitely try it. But some people are still wary about what the freemium model means for the future.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when I paid the money for it, if I got anything for my money, because it turned free right after that.
Yeah, and the other thing with Affinity Photo 2 is, I mean, it's going to keep working probably for a couple of years, but then eventually with new operating systems, it'll probably stop working eventually. And they're not supporting it anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point too. All right, thanks for that.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again here. Okay, and I'm just going to do some quick live demos of Siril and Affinity now. I'm not going to be able to show a complete workflow because we only have 15, 20 minutes left. So I'll just show some things that I think are interesting to me about these programs. So I have Siril open here. For people who have not seen this interface before, basically the toolbar at the bottom is all about view options. So zooming in and out, putting on different visualization modes. That's basically like the auto stretch in PixInsight, that kind of thing. And then the The two buttons that are highlighted in blue up here at the top, this little home button right there is your working directory, which is also reflected here in the middle. And then that matters because whenever you run a script in Siril, it will look for those files in your working directory. So just as an example, if my working directory right now is set to my desktop, and I went here into the Siril scripts and I ran something like one-shot color pre-processing, that script expects all of my data, you know, my folder of lights, my folder of darks, my folder of flats, so forth, to be on my desktop, basically. So that's why those two buttons are highlighted in blue, is what I always tell beginners, is remember to set your working directory, and then you can use scripts to start pre-processing. We're gonna skip pre-processing today, but I'll show you a different thing here, which is how Siril does RGB compositing. Because like I said, you can only be working on one picture at a time in Siril. So there's a number of processes that work like this. Basically, you open up the process. I'm going to open up RGB compositing. And it asks you to load in some data here. So I'm going to load in a red channel that's already stacked, a green channel, and a blue channel. And then it appears that nothing has happened. But actually, if we look right here, it says unsaved compositing result. So as soon as I loaded those files in, it started making an RGB image right here. And if I turn on the auto stretch, we can actually see that image that it just composited together from these files. And you can also use a luminance with this too. So, and then in addition, these pictures are already aligned just to save time, but right here within image compositing, it even has a little star alignment procedure right here. So there's a lot of things I've found where you might be used to how they work in PixInsight, and in Siril, they do work a little bit differently. So if you're already an advanced imager, moving between PixInsight and Siril can be a little confusing. You really might have to relearn some things. But for a beginner, I don't think it's particularly confusing how to use Siril. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this. So I now have this unsaved RGB composition here. Like I said, we can turn the visualization mode from linear, which just means how the data currently looks to the computer, to an auto stretch, which is just a visualization mode just for us to see. Sometimes people will turn on this mode and then forget that, you know, they haven't actually stretched their data yet. So when you go to save, I'll just save this result as RGB. It does give you this pop-up that says viewer mode is not linear. So it's just a good little reminder that like what you're seeing here is not actually the stretch yet, right? Because we haven't actually stretched the data. So it just gives you that little nice warning, and I'll just click save anyway. Okay, the first thing that this data, you know, I would do with it is probably remove this gradient, because I shot, you know, the red, green, and blue on different nights. And so you can see that we sort of have this purple to green gradient going on. And it's a fairly complex background extraction, because in addition to this green to purplish diagonal gradient this way, we also have all of this dust in here, because this is of an IFN region near Polaris. So if I was doing a manual background extraction, I actually wouldn't use the auto stretch mode. I would change it to the histogram mode, which you can think of as sort of like boosted STF in PixInsight. But it allows you to see things a lot clearer, because you can see with this auto stretch mode, it's a lot harder to see exactly where the dust is for placing those background samples. While in the histogram mode, it becomes a lot easier.
Hey, Nico.
Yeah.
real quick, you can hit the minimize button on that you are sharing your entire screen little hover bar.
Oh, let's see. Oh,
It's
thank
like-
you. I see
yeah.
it. I see it.
I think
Yep,
that should do
thank
it.
you.
Yeah, cool.
Got it.
Yeah.
So of course there's now there's a lot of different ways to do background extraction, and Grappert is built in as a plugin into Siril. So it's available as a Python script. So I'll just show that real quickly first. It's very quick. You can just click apply here, and it runs the background extraction pretty well. Now, sometimes people, I think, are worried with Grappert that it might be extracting too much and removing some details in their images. The other thing to keep in mind with these AI-based models is that they can sometimes get fooled by little things along the edge. If you have any strange noise, or in this case, I think just a bright star even, they can maybe do weird things on the edges. But overall, I think that's a pretty nice result. I'm going to undo it, though, just to show you one other background extraction, which is just Siril's built-in background extraction, which has a few different interpolation methods, RBF, or just two, I guess, RBF and polynomial. With RBF, if I do use this, I change the smoothing. I bring it up quite a bit. The default is 0.5, but I find that usually overshoots quite a bit. Overcompensates and doesn't create a great model. So I usually turn the smoothing quite a bit up if I'm using RBF. The reason I wanted to show this is just to show something interesting about Siril, which is if I add some samples here, trying to avoid nebulosity. I click compute background. There's a lot of processes in Siril where they're fairly interactive like this, where you can place some samples, click compute background, and we actually haven't applied this background extraction yet. We can click show original image to see what this background extraction did. And then if there's something that we think is suspicious about it, we could actually go in here and delete samples or add additional samples. So for instance, these bright stars down here seem to be creating some kind of glow. So let me add a sample down there and see if we can get rid of that. And then I just click compute background again. And you can see that probably worked somewhat, but it might not have been a good idea because you can see it created this big red circle here. So I can always just then right click to delete that sample and click compute background again. And you can just, I just like how quick this is, right? There's a lot of processes like this in Siril where you get this almost instantaneous kind of feedback. You don't have to wait. You don't have to undo anything. You can really just go in here and play around and see, is this doing a good job with the background extraction? Let's see. Let's try adding more samples. Oh, I like that better, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this. Okay, but we still do have a little bit of weirdness here on the bottom and the top. So I'm just going to quickly crop this image down just a little bit. To crop in Siril, you just draw out a box on the image and then right click and choose crop. Okay, and then the next thing that I want to show is this is obviously a super aggressive stretch, this histogram stretch. And so it's actually doing a pretty nice job, though, of bringing out the nebulosity. But the stars, of course, are really blown out. Like you can see these giant blown out stars here that are not only clipped, but like pretty bloated as well. So if we go to the auto stretch, now the stars look a lot better, but of course the nebulosity is pretty dim. So this is a common problem, and it's why we turn to the starless method when we're doing these kinds of nebula shots of separating the stars and the nebula and then putting them back together. Siril has a very cool implementation of that together with StarNet. So if I go up here to image processing and go down to star processing and choose StarNet star removal, this gives me a few different options here. And I do want to pre-stretch the linear image, because remember, this is still linear. I do want to generate a star mask. That just means, you know, a stars only image along with the stars image. And then the interesting one is this recompose stars on completion. Let me just quickly show you that. So I'm going to click execute. And StarNet, like the RC Astro tools, can use your GPU. In this case, it is using it on my Mac here. It's almost done. There we go. And it brings up this star recomposition window, which, as you can see, has two columns of sliders here and histograms at both the top of both of those columns. And you can see right here at the top, it says background stretch parameters on the left and star stretch parameters on the right. And this is a live interface. So as I'm stretching things with these two sets of sliders, you immediately see what it's doing to the image over here on the left. So even if I don't always use this tool to make my final image, I find it's very helpful for just visualizing what I have. Like, right? Like if I'm working on some data and I'm not sure if I have enough data yet because, you know, and I think maybe I don't have enough integration, I'll often bring it into this just to quickly get an idea. By default, the stretch on the left is a generalized hyperbolic stretch, and the stretch on the right is a modified arcsine stretch. And I do find that those stretches are usually the correct choices, but if you want to change them, you can click Advanced, and you can change the type of stretch for either the nebulosity or for the stars. Okay, I'm not going to belabor how GHS works, but I'm just going to go ahead and make a sample here of a dark area of the image and sample that for the symmetry point. And then we'll start stretching this. And as you can see, I'll just make this pretty dramatic. Stretching on this left-hand side is only stretching the nebulosity, right? I mean, there might be a few, I think these little bright points are actually probably background galaxies, not stars, but sometimes it'll let a couple stars through, but usually it does a really nice job. And this is iterative, right? You can click Apply, and when you click Apply, it's now stretched that nebulosity, and then it lets you do the stretch again. So a lot of times I'll do this initial stretch, and then I'll use the black point slider to move this back over to the left and apply that. And then I'll do another stretch for the dimmer nebulosity. Okay. And so now we've stretched a starless image of this region. To bring in the stars, we can go over here to star stretch parameters. And for this one, I usually don't use the symmetry point. I just use the stretch factor. And I just do this iteratively a few times until over here, visually, the stars are starting to come in and look how I want them to look. And you can go back and forth between these stretches. So after you've brought in the stars somewhat, you might think, oh, actually, I want to stretch the nebulosity a bit more now. So I can go back in here and keep stretching the nebula. When you're happy with it, you just click Close, because you've already applied all of these stretches as you've been going. To finish this one, I just want to quickly show Verilux Curves. I know we're probably almost out of time here. Okay, so I think to finish this, I would change the black point. This is a very nice just curves tool. I actually like it better than Photoshop's. I like it. The actual points and histogram here, I like actually better than PixInsight's version 2. You can apply things as you go. And then what I mentioned earlier that's really cool about this one is you can do a curve on the saturation in this image. So if I found, from that star recomposition process, I like the saturation of the stars, I could try to preserve the highlights, the saturation in the highlights, and maybe just bring out the saturation in the shadows using this Verilux Curves. So I think this is a really neat addition. Since we're running out of time rapidly, let me just quickly go over to Affinity and show you something with that. It's going to be quick.
You can not feel too rushed. We're still holding the audience well, and yeah.
Okay.
We don't give people the hook unless it really starts to get over.
Sure. Thanks. Okay, so here's Affinity. Like I mentioned, you can see that. Okay. Like I mentioned, they've, in this new version, since Canva took over, they've brought Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Publisher, I can't remember what they were all called, into one program. And then in doing so, they also renamed them. And so what used to be Affinity Photo in the new version of Affinity is now Affinity Pixel. And so it's basically now a workspace. If you're familiar with Photoshop, there's this idea of a workspace where it changes the tools that you have up. And so now Affinity has put all of their programs into one program, and the kind of thing you're working on, you choose a different workspace. So for anything with photo editing, you choose Pixel. A few other little things have moved around. So let me see, where did they put the astrophotography stack? I should know this. Yes, okay, so it's under File, New Image Process, Astrophotography Stack. So if you want to do pre-processing of your astrophotography data in Affinity, this is where to find it. File, New Image Process, Astrophotography Stack. Oh yeah, so what I wanted to show though was what I'm often doing in a layers-based program is blending my data and colorizing it. And there's ways to, of course, to do this in PixInsight, but I just find I like doing it in a layers-based program personally. So here's 2 layers. You can see over here on the right, I have O3 on the top, and I have HA on the bottom. And in this region of space, the HA and O3 are very distinct. They're very different. And so I want to give these 2 mono images different colors. And so I'm going to click on the HA layer and go down here to my adjustments. And in Photoshop language, you would add a hue/saturation adjustment layer and then turn on the checkbox that says colorize. I think Affinity has improved this by just calling this adjustment recolor, which I think is more easy to think about. It's just like, yes, you're recoloring this layer. So I'm going to click recolor. And you can see immediately it adds a recolor adjustment layer here to my layer stack. It's above the HA layer. And the hue is 0. The saturation is 100. I might bring that down a little bit on this one, but something like that. Okay. And then I'll turn on the O3 layer. Since this is a layers-based program, when you turn on a layer on top of the other things, it covers them up unless you change the blend mode. So right now the blend mode is set to normal. I'm going to change it to screen. Okay, and then I'm going to add a recolor adjustment to this one. So I'm just going to click on the adjustment and choose recolor. And I'll choose a teal color for the O3. And of course, because this recolor adjustment is on the top of the layer stack, it made the entire image teal. Now, in Photoshop, this is an example of Photoshop being weird and I think confusing people. In Photoshop, what you would do is add something called a clipping mask. And the easiest way to add a clipping mask is to hold down the Option or Alt key and click on this little line between this layer and this layer. And I've taught this to people so many times, and it's very not intuitive, I would say. Like, it's very hard for people to remember that's how you make this teal adjustment just apply to the 03. So in Affinity, this is how they fixed it. You just drag this on top of this, and they call it place inside. I'll do it for this one too. And I think that is way more intuitive for how to apply an adjustment layer to a particular layer. And then it also hides that adjustment layer, but there's now a little caret here, and you twirl that open, and it has all of the adjustment layers that are applying just to that layer. And of course, you can go back in, and these are endlessly editable. And that's, to me, that's one of the advantages of a layers-based program like this, or Photoshop, in this final blending, in that a lot of times what I'll be doing is I'm blending together. These are just the narrowband channels. But next, what I'd probably do with this image is I'd be blending in the RGB and the stars and all these different things. And a lot of times, after I've started blending many things together, I want to come back in here and change something. And in most Astro programs, it's not that easy to go back and change things like this, change a color or change a saturation level. So that's why I like working with these kinds of programs for this final kind of color adjustment. All right, I think that's all I have.
Hi, we do have a couple of questions, and John wants to know if this is better to run on Windows or Linux, and that question came up while you were talking about Affinity, but perhaps you can make a statement about all the programs we talked about.
Sure. So Siril, the first one that I was showing, is still developed by a Linux developer, so I assume it works very well on Linux, but I've never had an issue with it on Mac or Windows either. Affinity is not available for Linux. It's only available for Windows and Mac.
Okay, thank you. And if you're finished with most of your presentation, I'm going to go back to a question that was asked a while back by, who was it, John? Yeah, John at Astra. But which freeware will yield the most professional images?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Hey, and
John.
you said that earlier. You said that earlier, that you don't choose to rate them. So
yeah, my feeling is right now, in terms of you know, what has a lot of the professional kind of same plugins that PixInsight has. I think Siril is in the lead for me. I think that it has a lot of developers who are very interested in making things that are interesting and sort of competing with the best of PixInsight. So I would say Siril probably.
And
Nico, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex.
should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll wait.
Brody wants to know if there's any advantages of Affinity over GIMP or disadvantages.
Yes, good question. On my Mac that I'm running right here, which is a fairly new computer, Affinity is more performant, meaning it's faster, and it just like I can just tell it's a lot snappier than GIMP. GIMP slows down with a lot of processes, and you can see it actually like redrawing the image and all that kind of stuff. And so, and then the other thing I would say is that if you're a long-term Photoshop user like I am, Affinity will feel more at home than GIMP. GIMP has a few different ways of working with things. It has a lot of different terminology. The toolbar over here, which I didn't touch in this tutorial, but The toolbar is a lot more similar to Photoshop in Affinity than it is in GIMP.
So that leads me to my question, comparing Affinity to Photoshop. Are they like 90% the same? Or is Photoshop has other things that Affinity really doesn't, as I hear you explain it. So what's your evaluation of that? I mean, why should I keep paying Adobe for Photoshop?
Do you do any home printing?
Nope.
Okay. That to me, that's still an issue where I have printer profiles and paper profiles and all these things set up in Photoshop and color management where Affinity doesn't do it the same way. And so I haven't figured out how to replicate that in Affinity. For processing, it really would just be the only reason I think with astrophotography processing to not move to Affinity is you'd have to relearn a few things, how they do it differently. Like what I just showed with the clipping masks and how in Affinity you just drag it on. But if you are okay with just relearning a few things, then yeah, it's there. It's just as good, I think.
And I guess I missed it. Is this a one-time purchase, or are they on a?
No, it's a freemium model. So basically everything except AI features are free. And so
everything you showed us was free.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So where they're charging is, in the newest versions of Photoshop, there's things like generative fill, where like if you were missing part of your picture, you could just select it and say fill this, and it does a pretty convincing job. That would be the one thing that's missing in this. That it's only missing in the free version. They do have it in the $15 a month AI version.
Oh, we have another question from Dennis. He's asking if you can specifically allocate GPU resources in Affinity.
Oh, good question. I'm not sure about that. Let's see if I can quickly find it in the settings.
I know for like
Performance. Okay, there's RAM usage limits. Let's see. I don't see. Oh wait, whoa! There's a lot of stuff here. I don't know. Sorry, there's too much for me to go through. I would guess yes, because from what I've seen, Affinity is a very deep program that's very concerned with performance. So I would think you could, but I haven't tried.
Okay. That's it for the YouTube questions so far.
No, there's a couple of others.
Where just them.
One was, did you prefer? It sounds like you prefer Affinity over GIMP.
Yes, I do. Yeah, but I would say part of that is just because I came from Photoshop, and I'd say it's more similar.
And then another was this pointed out that there were newer star removal tools in Siril now. And is there any reason that you used StarNet tonight? Is it just because it was free, or do you consider it better?
Yeah, let me show something. So before Siril opened up to third-party developers through Python scripting, they already were working with some third-party developers like StarNet. And so StarNet is actually built into the main program here. And that's how I was able to do that star recomposition that I showed. So you can't do star recomposition as easily with the other ones. Now you could still do it. You could run the different kinds of star removal and then go into star recomposition and load the images, but it's not as like smooth. It's not as like built into the program like I showed. In terms of one versus the other, I haven't done any kind of analysis to say for my images, they tend to all of them work really well. It like just removing the stars, leaving the background galaxies, that kind of thing. there are still some kinds of astro images that star removal can mess up, especially high resolution images of galaxies and things like that. You have to be very careful there. Since I mostly work with these more wide images of nebulae, it's not a big issue.
Okay, does anybody see any other questions?
I don't see any others on YouTube.
Okay, any more questions from here in the room?
I had one, Nico. So obviously a lot of the work you're doing with nebula photos is going to be doing a lot of stacking work, but I recall earlier on you were, in a lot of your other videos, you do a lot of discussion about DSLR work. And I'm wondering if there's a software that you would have a preference for individual photo management, where if you're not doing stacking, but you've got a lot of different subjects and you just want to cull through your photos, or your individual subs, short of going through like Blink in PixInsight, if you wanted to do something more quickly to go through a bunch of photos.
Yeah, good question. I didn't talk about it tonight, but Adobe Bridge actually has always been free, and it's for raw photos from a DSLR or mirrorless camera. It's pretty good for all the different options that it has. If it doesn't do, of course, astro-specific kinds of weighting or ranking, but if I'm just visually looking for something like meteors during a meteor shower, and I took those images with a DSLR, I probably would open Bridge, just because it's very fast with raw images.
All right, you can stop sharing now if you want.
Yep,
Yeah.
I will.
All right, well, it sounds like people have got a lot of interesting rabbit holes to explore for ways to not spend money, or more likely ways to make them spend money in ways they weren't planning. Thank you, Nico, for giving us a great overview of some of the stuff that's out there. In a lot of ways, we're living in the golden age of image processing. We've got so many choices these days, and there's tools for a lot of different workflows to pick from. So thank you so much. And I think
Good, Linda. I think we got one snuck in here. Any
Sure.
programs particularly recommended for C-star data that's super easy?
Super easy. I think the easiest is going to be that the smart telescope makers themselves are adding processing to their apps, and I think C-Star app has already done this, so that's probably going to be the easiest. Is just you use the stacking that's built into the app, and then you actually use the processing that's built into the app.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I would say Siril is actually probably the one that's most embraced C-Star users, because the official Siril application has a tutorial on their website and a script just for C-Star users. And then a bunch of other people have done third-party things, because the official script didn't support the mosaic mode. So then almost immediately people started coming in, like Naz at Nastronomy, and made a script that would support C-Star's mosaic mode. So I would say beyond just the app itself, Siril.
Thanks. Okay, Linda, now we're clear again.
Okay, thanks, Alex. All right, everybody. Well, thank you again, Nico. That was an interesting presentation. And we'll see you all, not in 2 weeks, but next week for Charlie Bracken. So see you all then. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night. And Nico, you're welcome to stay and chat.